May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to Thee, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. Welcome, everybody. So this weekend I was in Manhattan following my granddaughter, who's going to turn 16 in February, who wanted to go to certain stores to reach certain sales to buy certain things, and she had a map and several apps on her phone. She had decided what she was going to buy and where she was going to buy it, and we were to follow her, and off we went. Starting at 14th Street, we ended on 60th Street, and in between we saw two musicals. I put those in there so we could get at least 6 hours of rest. This was a good plan. So that was my Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving Day is when we all started this adventure, and I came home yesterday. I think she has the flu. She has a fever now. Goes to show. So as I said earlier, this is not only a baptism, it is Christ the King Sunday, and just so you know, it's the perfect day for a baptism. It's like you planned it. Because what we talk about is what kind of a king Jesus is. And we're lucky in this church to have this mosaic showing us what kind of king we have. That doesn't look like he is a president of the United States, say, or prime minister of England. That's all gold. Those are gold tiles that are all around Jesus. And his gold halo is hard to make out in the midst of all the gold tiles. But that is an icon of Christ the King. And it is suitable on Christ the King Sunday to hear this story of him being interrogated by Pontius Pilate. Do we really need this little bit of Lent in the middle of our Pentecost? Yeah, we usually have to remember what kind of king he is. In order to become the king which we worship so easily in church with our hymns of praise, we have to go with him through the suffering, and we have to see why it is that he wanted to tell the truth about human nature. And John's gospel tells the truth by creating in dramatic form all the things Jesus said. So hidden in this text are some things that are very important to know about human nature, which is why Jesus came, and is why we proclaim him as king. So human nature is to betray the ones we love the most. Anybody not have a problem with that? It's just human nature. People get betrayed and we betray. It's part of human nature. And Jesus came right into the crux of that and showed what it would look like if we didn't betray one another, but saw each other through the love that God has for us, is what Jesus embodies, showing us how to be love. Now in this story, we are confronted with some of our own prejudices. Like, most of us think one person betrayed Jesus. Anyone know who that one person is? Judas. This little gospel that we have here says, no. It wasn't just Judas. There was many other betrayers. Who denied Jesus 3 times? Peter. So in Greek, the word, I'm trying to think of the right word here, and I just forgot it. It goes right out the door. Handing over. To hand someone over is the same as betray. So it means the same in the Greek language. So the first person who hands Jesus over is Judas, who invites these jailers to arrest Jesus and take him to the Jewish authorities. But before that, Judas has to get Jesus away from his disciples, and Jesus presents himself. Do you remember that's part of the story? He says, "Who are you looking for? Arrest me, leave these men alone." So he presents himself fully willing to go with the authorities. That's the first Passover, or betrayal. And then next comes Judas, next comes Peter, and then there's more betrayals that happen. The high priest and his crew can't put a man to death. So they bring him to Pilate, the governor of Jerusalem at the time, and he has the power to put Jesus to death. So he is handed over from the disciples to the Jewish, they were the main priests and the authorities in Jerusalem, so they had a lot of power in Jerusalem. Those are the only Jews that John ever talks about, are these particular Jews in Jerusalem. He's handed over or betrayed to these guys in charge of the Jewish rites and temple rites. And then he is taken to the Roman consul, and he's turned over again to him. So the Jews themselves say, we can't put him to death, that's what we want. So they give him over or betray him to the Roman governor. And then we have this little discussion. In this, the Roman governor, Herod, says, Pontius Pilate, says that Jesus, I hear you're the king. Are you the king or are you not? And he doesn't answer the question. Did you notice that? He doesn't answer. He says, well, did others tell you who I am? In other words, are you taking it on the word of the people who betrayed you, who betrayed me, who betrayed the Jews? In other words, it's all hearsay. But what Pilate ends up doing is turning the tables on the Jewish religious leaders who want Jesus dead. So he's showing them that their king is not a king whatsoever, although he gets a beautiful cape or coat of crimson red. He gets a crown of thorns on his head, and they stick a pole in his hand and say, "Hail, King of the Jews." He gets King of the Jews put on the board on his cross. So that's a cruel irony that this king is really no king at all. He's just a king who is beaten and made fun of in a terribly cruel and sarcastic manner. And in this reading, we get to see how those Jewish leaders betray their own trust in their own God. This is the time of the Sabbath, the Passover. It's the holiday of the Passover. And what's happening on the Passover is that the Jewish people declare their allegiance to the one God. The one God. And what do they end up saying? They end up saying, we have no God but the emperor. We have no God but the emperor. Because they want their allegiance to end in Jesus' death. So they swear their allegiance to the emperor. So they have just betrayed their own selves. They betrayed their faith and all the history of the Jewish people. So the text is a little tricky here. The last betrayal or handing over happens with Jesus himself. When he offers up his spirit, they use the Greek word, he hands over his life. So he is betraying himself, or I choose to think he is handing it over of his own will. He becomes the person who's really in charge of all these conversations, and we, listening to them, hear the truth in our hearts because we know that Jesus came not to serve the powerful, but to be a servant of the weakest. So he came to be a servant. When he's lifted up on that cross, it's like he's being lifted up on the throne of heaven. And in John's gospel, he does equate all that. He says he's lifted up on the cross as he will be lifted up in the resurrection and lifted up in the ascension. And he is in his rightful place, ruling where he needs to rule, which is in the kingdom of heaven. We belong to two kingdoms, and we have to choose our own allegiance to one or the other. And most of the time, we're following the commerce god, as I was in Manhattan, following my teenage granddaughter, going to all the shops. We were pawns of the god of commerce. But in church, we try to re-feed and give sustenance to the part of us that is hungry for the truth that we see only in our Lord Jesus Christ. And coming today to become the most important Christian in this room is little Kaylin Grace, who will be welcomed in the name of Christ into this, her new Christian family. And we get to stand up and proclaim who we believe is king. And it's not the God of commerce, and it's not a Democrat, it's not a Republican, but it's the lowliest of the low, the poorest of the poor, the man who was crucified in a shameful death. This is who we worship as the God of our hearts and the King of our souls.